of that area, they moved on to another area. So that was a communistic system, and it lasted for 1 million years. But at one point, humans decided that it's better, if you have the right conditions, to settle in one place and grow food in that one place, take animals and use the animals to have milk, and use the animals for meat, etc. So they produced a first system of a tribe, if you like, called tribalism. Not even tribalism, but that sort of beginnings of tribalism. So they settled. Then another group of human beings came to that, and they came across this what we call tribe, and decided, oh, they're onto a good thing. They've got everything grown here, they've got animals, we're still hunter-gatherers, they're in a much better situation. We're going to join them. But the problem is, they decided to join them with aggression, because they said, we're going to take over, we don't need you, we're going to take all this for ourselves. This was the beginning of tribalism. So different groups with different tribes, and they fought each other. For the first time in human history, human beings killed each other. No other animals do that. People say, oh yes they do, but they don't. They fight each other. They don't rarely kill each other. Very rarely do they kill. By accident they may, but they don't deliberately kill each other. They fight in a sort of formal way in order to gain control. Human beings actually killed each other. And not only did they do that, but they caught other human beings and made them their slaves and made them work. And they can lie back and enjoy the proceeds of that work. So this was the beginning of slavery, the beginning of a class system.
So just for clarification, so at what point have we moved from your definition of communism now, like of that you've described, what is communism in your view and what's not communism?
I'm trying to get, communism comes at a much later stage.
Oh, okay, right, okay.
We talk about prehistory, which was the time before tribalism. So the beginning of history was the agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution was the first revolution where human beings participated. They established villages and fields and towns and all the rest of it. Then we had this tribalism. That developed into slavery, because some of the human beings were fighting others and they captured them and used them as slaves. That was the beginning of slavery. And slavery lasted for quite a long time. Slavery built the pyramids. Slavery did lots of good things in its own way, but it meant it exploited other human beings. So there were two classes. There was the slave class and the slave-owning class. And that developed eventually into feudalism, which was the ruling class, if you want to call them that, the people that lay back and usually the others, decided that they could settle with these, get these slaves to become workers on the land. They took control of the land and made these peasants, these ordinary slaves, into free the slaves in order to give them the land and work the land on the understanding that the workers, the peasants, belonged to the feudal class, the aristocracy as well. And that was a system which lasted for quite a while, and it developed, but eventually that system became inefficient. And the typical example, not a bit of out of date really, but the typical example was America. The United States of America was, for the southern part of America, a slave-owning society. The northern part were more progressive. They were the beginning of a capitalist society where people were paid to do work, and the people that owned them, or owned this industry and everything else, got profits from that. The South were not like that. The South was still feudalistic in the sense that they had owned the fields and the cotton, and they owned the big houses and everything, and they had these slaves. But really, the United States, the North realised that the United States was going to be a united States of America. They had to have one system, and that system had to be a capitalist system, where you get rid of slavery, free the slaves, make the slaves into workers, and pay them. Because it was actually more efficient to pay the workers than have them as slaves. The slaves cost money. Even though they're free, they have to be fed, they have to be housed, they have to be looked after like machines, they have to be oiled and kept fairly healthy in order to work. Workers, on the other hand, are paid money and they can find their own accommodation, they can find their own food, they don't care about the workers. They have money, they pay them money, you get on with it. That was capitalism, the beginning of capitalism. And that started in Britain, for instance, in 1648, when there was an English Revolution, where the old feudal system was done away with by the rise in the capitalist bourgeois class of merchants and of industrialists. And that developed into a very efficient capitalist system which did really good things. It built railways and all the rest of it. So that's the system we have now. However, in the late part of the 18th, 19th century, the working class started to develop the ideas of a society where they, the working class, would produce all the wealth, could get all the benefit of all the waste that they produce. Why should they need a capitalist to take the money and get profits when they're the ones who do all the work? So the ideas of socialism and communism arose. And in the late 19th century, Marx and Engels, who were the main beginnings of the ideas of communism, decided that yes, we could have a society where working people actually owned and controlled everything, get rid of the capitalists, just like the capitalists got rid of the few people and the few that got this. You have all the other classes, you only have two classes. Why not just have one class? One class in the entire world would be the same as the one class in prehistoric times. However, the difference, of course, is you've gone through all this development and has all this industry. You could actually produce everything in abundance. You could produce enough of everything under a system if you had that control of the economic facilities. And so the ideas of socialism came about, particularly at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. Now the Bolsheviks, as they were the majority part of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, which was the majority, was Bolshevik means majority. Menshevik means minority. It was split into a majority of Bolsheviks and a minority called Mensheviks. And the Bolsheviks were headed by Lenin and all the other Bolsheviks. And then it came to a point in 1905 there was a revolution which didn't succeed. In the process of that revolution, all these working class people set up what was called Soviets. Soviets just another working councils, workers' councils. So they had a like our councils here, but they were workers' councils, and they were set up in effect after the first revolution in 1905. But that revolution was destroyed by the Tsarists, and a lot of it was blamed on the Jews. But split people after that. So the 1905 revolution was a failure. But in 1917, in February 1917, there was another huge revolution because Russia was part of the war, and the war was going very badly for Russia. And the Russian peasants and workers thought to themselves, why are we fighting this war against our brothers in Germany who are the same as us, or our brothers in other countries? All the workers of the world are the same. They're the same. Why should we kill each other for the sake of the capitalist class to make this so they can make profits out of armaments, etc. and war? So they had a revolution in the early part of 1917 where the Labour Party, in effect, the Labour Party took control. But the Labour Party said, well, we're going to continue with the war. We want to continue with the war. We believe in Russia. It's very wonderful Russia. And the Bolsheviks said, no, Bolsheviks, the workers are international. We don't want a revolution in just one country. We want a revolution throughout the world. We want to have the whole thing. That's the only way we can make it a strong revolution. And that's what happened in later on in the year when the Bolsheviks took over from the Mensheviks or others, the Labour Party, and they took control, and they were the first Marxist-Leninist party, and their idea was to go forward, and that must use this word forward, into communism, because communism wasn't possible in those days. Russia, like many countries, was so poor and so backward, they couldn't possibly have a society where you could produce everything to abundance and therefore do away with money altogether, because if you have so much of everything, it loses its value and it doesn't cost any money anyway. So communism, we call communist communism is a totally different from what everyone else calls communist. So communism never existed in the Soviet Union, not even socialism, but because it was so backward and so oppressed by the outside world, by the counter-revolutionaries in the outside world, it was basically destroyed. Even though it hung on, it never really established itself to go forward to communism because it was so affected by the outside capitalist imperialist world. And that's why we have what we have today, a Russia which is no longer a socialist society, which is now part of the capitalist world. But the point is, what we have now is that we have the Western imperialists, that is America, Britain, France, possibly Germany, these very few countries which are still very imperialistic countries and still want to take control of Russia and China and everywhere else, because that's their way, that's their thing.
So, look, I would lay out a general paradigm, because you've laid out a paradigm. I think the communist socialist paradigm, when it comes to human nature, is flawed. And I think that's why it fails economically, politically, and culturally. So I'll give you an example. Can we stick to, say, The Great Leap Forward by Mao, right? Now, The Great Leap Forward, it was a theory of the communal society, the idealistic man, living in that sort of way. And what they did throughout China is they set up communes where collectively people worked. And it led to the deaths of millions of people. And likewise, if we go to all the other Soviet or communist or socialist states, they've done something similar over periods of time. The fundamental issue seems to be that they cannot diagnose the human condition. They cannot explain how it is that human beings are going to be motivated to work if everybody gets paid the same and if there isn't some form of hierarchy. So this is why I believe that even if you look at Cuba today, if a doctor gets paid the same as a janitor, why would you want to be a doctor?
See, I
want to be a doctor.
I would break
But it doesn't work.
I would break those two things apart, because some people, for example, will, even to the detriment of their income, will chase down something, some dream. They'll try and invent something. Like, some people are driven, by things other than money and this sort of stuff. Whereas the hierarchy problem is deeply fundamental, because what you've got is a group of people trying to live together. You can't have everyone operate as a single hive mind who agrees on everything. And so at some point there needs to be some system of laws and regulations, and they need to be enforced. And whoever and however that comes about becomes a de facto class distinction.
The thing is with human nature, I've had this argument many times, human nature is not a static thing.
Yes.
You're not built for it. Human nature depends entirely on your environment. The human nature of slave society is totally different from the human nature of feudal society, which is totally different from capitalist.
So we have a different paradigm with human nature. We believe there is innate nature, that it's not purely a product of its environment.
And it's a bit of an interface.
So the thing
So
is,
it goes back.
if you say that there's an innate human nature which is a negative thing,
No, not a negative thing, just that there is something innate about human behaviour, and then that interacts with the environment, rather than being a tabula rasa entirely shaped by the environment.
So I'll
That's
give-
our view.
so to make it
Can I
easier,
just say-
just one small thing. So you have Rousseau's ideas, this egalitarian human nature, then you have the Hobbesian idea, right? Which one are you more closely aligned to?
Hobbesian was sort of anti-imperialist. He was a historian of note, but he wasn't a Marxist.
Right.
So therefore he interpreted things in a different way. Which you have done with this thing about Mao. Now in Mao's China, at the time, it was a very, very backward feudal society. It's impossible to move from a feudal society to a communist society just like that. You're bypassing the whole development of capitalism. So what the problems China had, and the same problems in Russia in the Soviet Union, was that they were starting from a very, very low basis. Almost still a feudal society, going from that to a communist society was just simply impossible. So what they did, and this is what happened in the Soviet Union, and it has happened in China, I'll explain it. It happened in the Soviet Union when the Communist Party, the Bolshevik Communist Party decided that in order to get to a more advanced socialist society, you had to allow a certain amount of capital. It was called new economic policy. And people that took advantage of that economic policy were capitalists. Not big capitalists, but capitalists. They were called nip. And they were exploiting the situation, which was dire. Because let's face it, the Civil War, which occurred immediately after the 17 Revolution, after the 1920s, was a horrific event in Russia. Many people died. The West invaded, the United States and Britain invaded on the side of the Tsarist white guard, and the Bolsheviks with the Red Army, and they fought a terrible civil war. In the process, Russia was absolutely devastated. There's no way you could have an advanced industrial socialist society in those circumstances.
Okay, so can I say something? You're narrowing down the failures of these Soviet states to historically contingent events. If we have a blank slate, I would say it wouldn't actually work despite those economic conditions not being there. And the reason is because the human nature diagnosis that they've given to what we are like as humans is a man-made construct, and it's a construct in which they have not captured the essence of humanity. So for example, every single place, whether it's Latin America or Africa or Asia or whatever, where they have tried it at a micro level or a macro level, is led to the same things. And I believe fundamentally it's because they have a system which doesn't accept that. You mentioned materialism before we started filming, right? It's fundamentally, its origin is materialism and naturalism, which is why you can never capture the human being. If you start off with theism, you can capture a better explanation of human nature and therefore a better economic, cultural and political system.
Yeah, so essentially the system's been designed for creatures other than us because it's not designed with humans as they are in mind.
Well, no, you see, what about human nature in the million years before the agricultural revolution? What was human nature then? We can see, because they're still, even today, hunter-gatherers and societies in South America and sometimes in Africa. Their human nature is totally communal. They have no desire to hurt anyone.
They have no desire to?
They have no desire to hurt anyone because there's no need to hurt anyone.
And the same is true in...
Okay, so what you're doing
The same is
that
true for most people in even this Western society,
yes, we're all basically
but
we're all basically communists.
That's not a sufficient condition for you to say that they believe in a communist ideology.
Yeah.
Because that fits well with Islam. That fits well with many ideologies.
But the thing is, when you talk about human nature, you've got to take it, analyse it going right back. It's not just right back. What we think is human nature today is human nature today, but it's not. It's become that because of all the things that have happened in the past. It's developed into it. In the early stages of human development, in the early stages of prehistory, human nature was totally different. It was very, very much on an equal society.
Okay, so can I just add something to help our conversation? When it came to these communist societies, and you've mentioned it a few times, David, it was about advancement. It was about electricity and railways. Okay? That is the fundamental wrong starting point. Because if the starting point is the material advancement of society, as opposed to something more transcendent, then you're gonna go in the wrong direction from the beginning, which is why the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, and all the other communist initiatives led to mass deaths.
But it's also the faith in the capital. It's like the capital is the be-all and end-all of provision, and it's the only way that they can gain security. And there are other ways to gain security, even if someone else has some degree of ownership over the capital. And the thing is, for me, again, there's this other hierarchy point where we've got to come and look at, say, even in principle, even for many mammals, not humans, like there emerges different classes, and there are reasons why different classes are. So when you've got a small, like a village, 700 people, 500 people maybe, it's a different scale, and we know in if you do mathematical analysis, modelling, whatever, over a certain size of cohabiting population, there's different dynamics emerge, and therefore for it to be stable, different things emerge. And we've seen that, as the example I gave with laws and the enforcement of laws, if everyone knows each other and you can all talk amongst each other, you don't necessarily need a codified law and an enforcement system, whereas over a certain size that's needed, and then there's necessarily some other class.
Yes.
So how could it even in principle deal with that?
Take the example of China again. China has gone through all this business with Mao, a very backward society, but eventually it decided, the Communist Party decided, that the only way to develop is to allow a certain amount of capitalism.
Okay, just one small point. You said it was backward, but at the time Shanghai wasn't backward. And that was due to capitalism.
When I use the word backward, I mean backward in economic terms. I mean, a feudal society is backward compared with a capitalist society because of economics. The economics of feudalism is inefficient compared with economics.
You don't think that the British opium trade had anything to do with why it was economically inferior? I think if there's a danger of doing a sort of a one-issue narrative and saying it's because of this.
What you said, because China realises through its own experience that imperialism, particularly British imperialism, has been a terrible, terrible effect on China. And it doesn't want to have anything to do with imperialism. And yet, China is the most advanced country in the world. And all this propaganda.
But also it has an imperial history longer than the existence of Britain. Imperial history.
But since the last 100 years, and the development of China since the 1948 when the communists took over, the development means that even today the Communist Party is controlled, and their attitude is to have a society which allows a certain amount of capitalism, but for the benefit of the Chinese people, and that's important. And when China goes into Africa, and it goes in anywhere else in the world, as what the West calls imperialism, it's not imperialism. It's actually doing something useful in the world, and actually in return they get friendship and they get cooperation from the people that they're giving the help to.
With the debt trap caveat, I reserve judgment on how altruistic their motions are.
If you're talking about debt, you can talk about in Africa or other parts of the world which are really poor. It's all to do with the IMF.
Well, that's what I meant. So colonialism, primarily it proceeded with the debt traps and followed those up with the military. This is why I'm saying we need to perhaps reserve judgment, because what they've done is a different way of inserting various kind of debt traps, where when those debts can't be serviced, they end up getting the land, the ports, the railways. So that's sort of the precursor, what we saw historically. It may turn out that de facto or functionally they're not that different. We don't yet know yet. I mean,
I don't know.
I just wanted to give that caveat,
What is China? Is it a socialist society or is it a capitalist society? It's not an easy question.
I think that's not going to work as a framing. We're using European framing to judge a different society. They are their own thing.
Yeah. But what is important, and the same with Russia, is that neither China nor Russia are imperialist in the way that the West is. The West's imperialism is utterly destructive. They'll bomb Iraq until they're stone it. They'll bomb Libya. They'll bomb Afghanistan. They'll bomb it.
To be fair, the Soviets did the same in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan. But there's plenty of evidence to show wide-scale destruction of religious institutions, of all these centers of learning, the Holodomor. What was that about in Ukraine?
I was going to ask you this. You believe in this, you're a Muslim. This is the main, I'm not saying it's bad, but it's the main problem for Marxists and all other idealistic philosophers. Right. Because the idealistic philosophers believe that the ideas come before the material. So therefore the ideas are we are born with these ways of thinking because God made us that way. The materialists believe that human beings are simply part of the development of the world, and then their ideas come from their material situation. So the way we think, and you think, and I think, and everyone thinks, depends on the situation.
So you've made a brilliant point there, and that's exactly what I want you to get to. Did you hear what he said there?
Pass it on.
So what he basically said is our starting points are different. So for example, as a Muslim, my starting point is innate knowledge. And innate knowledge, or what you called abstract knowledge, right? Your starting point, you're saying, is the material world or the material experience of humanity. What I would say to that is, firstly, when it comes to us speaking about our biological inheritance, we can go down the line of, say, evolution and say, okay, so we evolved our faculties under environmental selection pressures, and then we can have a complete materialistic story from A to Z. That will not lead to a communist mindset. If anything, that would lead to the selfish gene perspective and the complete opposite of what the communists claim is the human nature. Because from a Darwinian perspective, their idealistic human nature is not found in nature. Nature is read in tooth and claw. You see, now from the Islamic perspective, we believe we have what's known as the fitrah, this innate disposition in which we know right and wrong. Society may color it. However, if you're going to be a consistent communist, you cannot try and ground the human nature that the communists want to have through biology, because biology gives you the opposite of what the communists claim is out there. Because they believe in altruism, they believe in empathy, they believe in sympathy, but that's not the Darwinian picture.
I think.
But see, you're talking. This is going to be an impossible way of sorting this out.
Okay, go ahead.
Because if you can imagine, and it's not hard if you use a bit of imagination, to have a society where money doesn't exist.
Say that again?
Have a society where money doesn't exist.
Money doesn't exist.
We don't need imagination. We know they.
Have a society where money doesn't exist, but all the things that we use, eat, and have are mass-produced. There's enough food for everyone. There's enough water for everyone. There's enough cars. There's enough transport. There's enough everything for everyone. And when you have a society that has so much of everything, the value of that commodity goes.
We've got to be really careful with words here, because you can have a society without money, but you cannot have a society without value. So we can't mix the terms.
Well, no, value. See, Marxism, value exists only because what we consider to be what it is considered. Money has no value. All money is paper and nothing. It's just figures. Money doesn't exist. It really does not.
Well, no, that's only true of modern fiat currencies. Like money, for example, in the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was actual silver, right? An actual material, an actual wealth.
That's why the whole system of capitalism is in crisis.
Well, so let's be careful with the terms fiat currencies versus.
Going back to my main contention.
But let me just finish. Sure. If you have a society where there's no money because the value has gone down, well, if you have too much of everything, it goes down, except the capitalism is deliberately, artificially keep it up. But if you didn't have capitalism, the values of things would go down to something which was worthless, have no value other than itself. In other words, if you have something, it's the same as gold, if you have something which has an innate value in its own right, then that has value, but the value is not a monetary.
Okay, so can we ignore money for now and stick to communication? Because all societies have communication. The fundamental point I'm making is the communist worldview is inherently incoherent because the idealistic view that they have of human nature, I'll explain why it is, cannot be found in the materialistic genesis story of humanity's origin, which communists believe in, which is the Darwinian story. So communication, from a Darwinian perspective, as Dawkins says in The Selfish Gene, is manipulation of the signal receiver by the signal sender. All form of communication is manipulation for survival and reproduction. So when the communists say, well, we had this idealistic small society and now we have all this injustice and we need to go back to that, what they're forgetting is that if you believe in materialism and naturalism, the human nature that you get from that worldview does not fit what the communists claim human beings are like. There's an inherent incoherency in their view of human nature.
Because the word idealistic is misused. A communist doesn't have an idealistic point of view. As a totally materialist point of view. The idealistic point of view, that the idea comes before material, as opposed to the materialist idea, the material comes before idealism. Idealism is religion, such as yours. Materialism is our communist idea. But the idea of human nature being a static, basic thing that we're born with simply is not true. The only thing babies are born with, they have no idea of the world at all. They have no ideas, nothing. All they have is there are 6 basic instincts, and I can never remember them all. One is basically self-preservation, which is a natural reaction to danger. The other is the instinct to suck from the mother's nipple. The third is to excrete. The fourth is to eat. And I can't remember the sixth. But basically, very, very, very few. Unlike most animals, the vast, in fact, all animals, the differences in human beings are different from all other animals, that they do not survive on their instincts. All other animals do. So therefore, human beings have this different brain pattern where they have no ideas of anything until they're taught those ideas, either from their parents or from society or from the environment.
But the thing is, that is pure ideology, which is simply inconsistent with what we know about the brains. Because when these ideas were made, it was based on this idea that humans were a tabula rasa, that can be brought up in any kind of way. They can have society can change them in any kind of way. People are a blank slate, right? And Rousseau's a really big one on this. But what we found is the fact is the human brain is incredibly complex. It has built-in specific systems for dealing with social systems. There's a specific actual hierarchy system in the brain. Well, no, I mean this is just a fact. This isn't a matter of opinion. These are facts to be reckoned.
To give you a crazy study, right, or series of studies, people's moral behavior has changed due to brain injuries. And that's one of the strongest pieces of evidence to show that there's
But I mean,
innate modules.
not only that, we can specifically map the particular and watch the brain parts activate in relation to hierarchical relationships, social relationships, the way they relate to fear responses and love responses. It turns out that the brain is incredibly incredibly structured in terms of the predisposition to act in a certain way. Now, society can modify that, but it's not modifying a blank slate. It's modifying something with a definite class of behavioural basis. No, this isn't opinion. This is where we differ. I think
Well,
it
it's
is.
not a difference because you see, whatever you're quoting is some pseudoscience.
No. I mean, this is just standard neurology. This is standard neuroscience, and cognitive neuroscience, and I mean, you can just go look at the
And
normal
by
textbooks.
the way,
of
this
stuff.
fits well with our view of humanity's origin. As in, from our theistic worldview, humanity having this innate disposition for good and this innate ability to distinguish right and
I
wrong,
can see now.
which is why I believe any worldview which comes without God will always lead to the sort of atrocities that we saw with the communists.
About people who believe in God, of course, then they produce atrocities as well. There's plenty of evidence.
No, I'm not saying religious people can't be violent. I'm saying a worldview that begins with materialism will get human nature wrong.
Well, you believe in God.
Yes.
You believe, and you presume as well, you believe
yes.
that humans were produced by God. Well, I believe that human beings are part of a development of all animals. Human beings came from the ape family. The ape family were the highest before humans. The ape family were the highest intelligence. The most intelligent were the bonobo apes, which are the closest to humans. Now, the difference is with the bonobo apes and humans, the main difference is the hands. The hands are produced the human brain. Because when animals, such as humans, had hands and could do things with their hands, that completely changed the genetic order. Because bonobo apes and apes in general do not change. They stay as apes until they may disappear for whatever reason. But all animals stay as animals. Human beings change. And the way they change is because of their hands. Because when a human being can actually use their hands, make weapons, make tools, make things, make a house, do all the things using their hands and playing music and doing the writing and everything else. That is what made human beings. Because up until that moment, human beings existed only because of that skill of their hands.
Okay, but there's some recalcitrant facts. There's some facts which go against your ideas that you've just proposed. If that was truly humanity's origin, then right now, me and you, David, would only be focusing on survival and reproduction. But we focus on philosophy, moral worth, economic theories, empathy, sympathy, things which don't fit that Darwinian story.
One thing even more important than that is...
Let me just say this, because that's my point. Because of our development economically and socially and in every other way, because of our hands producing things right up to the moment now, we can produce amazing things. That process has actually affected our brains and made us think the way we are now. Nothing else has changed other than those developments.
So you've got to
made human beings.
So you've got to see something. There's something really important just happened here, because remember before you were essentially arguing for the tabula rasa. Now you're for the you being shaped by society, and you're essentially a blank slate until society shapes you, right? And we were saying the opposite. But if this evolutionary theory is holding you're saying, and like you just said, it affects our brains, well, then the outcome would be that our brain has structure and function built into it, that therefore it's not a blank slate. So we can't, there's literally, that's one deep contradiction right there.
Let me take an example. War. Human beings, even today, with all the propaganda and all the things, do not want to go to war. It's absolutely instinctive that human beings do not kill each other. They don't want to kill each other.
Yeah.
So why, do you say, is there war? Why are human beings killing each other? Why do they do that? Because they have an innate reason to kill each other? No. The reason why they do it is because they're brainwashed into doing it by the capitalist ruling class or any other ruling class. They say to them, you've got to go to war with this country because that country is your enemy. And even worse, there's a person in that country who leads that country. It's a terrible dictator, it's a terrible person. You must go to war to stop all that happening. We're going to preserve ourselves from the attack. they're going to destroy us unless we destroy them first. And that's what war is. And then the other part of war is the economic reason for war. Because lots of money being made from war always has.
Yes, the reasons given and that are used to manipulate people into going to war are very rarely the reasons wars actually happen. Of course, and they're usually to finance and trade.
But also, if human nature is warlike and destructive to kill other human beings, then we would all be at war with each other all of the time.
Sure. So let me just. So this book I finished called Strategic Insights by Dominic Johnson, right? He speaks about this exact topic, right? What he does is he says, okay, how do we explain war? How do we explain collective violence? And coming from a materialistic worldview, which he does, which you also believe in, he boils it down to our cognitive biases. So evolution has given us biological inheritance which leads to these cognitive biases, which is why we go to war. So what you're trying to say is this society, but like I've been pointing out to you, it's not society. It is actually, if you believe in the Darwinian story, then it's due to Darwinism itself. Because remember, going back to the ideas of Thomas Malthus, from whom Darwin got the idea of natural selection. You have too much population, not enough supply. So you have a competition, right? You have a competition. And that competition is what leads to the evolution of life. So that evolution is going to not only affect us physiologically, it's going to affect us psychologically, which is where the field of sociobiology comes in and evolutionary psychology comes in. And that's why people like Dominic, whatever his name is, he's arguing that all of this war that we have in the world is simply due to our biological inheritance. So being a materialist, you cannot point it down to it's the socialization of humanity which leads to warfare. It's not. And this is why the fundamental contradiction between the communist idea of human nature and their commitment to naturalism and materialism. Do you understand my point, though?
I do, but you're missing out the whole point of class contradictions. Human beings do not want to go to war. In the Second World War, most British soldiers said they didn't shoot at the Germans, they just shot in the air because they didn't want to kill anybody. And it's not natural to kill another human being. The only way you can kill another human being is to treat that person as an animal, which is a bad thing, and he must be destroyed.
Okay,
but in order to get,
hang on.
Can I just add just one small thing, David? Why is it that you have all these evolutionary academics, and then most of them are militant atheists? And remember, the Soviets and the communists were very big on teaching Darwinism
and atheism.
Why is it that they are in a consensus that human beings' ability and their drive, their inclination for war is a biological inheritance? So I gave you one example of Dominic Johnson, but there's lots of academics. You have Tooby, right? You have E.O. Wilson. You have all these academics going back from the 70s to now who've done study after study after study using the materialistic paradigm, and they've come to the conclusion this is the Darwinian imperative. So what I'm saying to you is you can't be a consistent communist and a Darwinist.
I'm not a people misinterpret Darwinism. Social Darwinism is a very dangerous idea. The Nazis used social Darwinism.
They did.
So did the French and the British.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very reactionary interpretation of Darwinism.
So did Stalin. He applied it to social classes.
Yeah.
But I'm totally against that.
No, that's fine.
But anyhow, the point is that the idea that you are putting forward is an idealistic idea because you believe people are born with these instincts or whatever.
No, this is what the Darwinists are saying.
Let's take this back a sec. Let's deconstruct this.
But they're materialists, so they have to be Darwinists.
Let's take this back a step and deconstruct it a bit, because nobody is saying that humans are like these ogres from Lord of the Rings who are just built for war and desperate for war. What they're saying is that built into human nature, where you've got this social bond, you're trying to socially bond with people, and then you also have fear, and then you have things like the flocking and the follower effect. They're saying that given the basic priors of human nature, then and then given the mechanics that lead to group wars, there is a predisposition, and they're very likely to go into war. That's what's more like. It's not like everyone's crazy, murderous ogres, you know.
Economic reasons for war. Wars don't just happen.
But economics is just putting a fiat currency blanket over the underlying thing of no. This is really important, because when you say economics, it's really just putting this fiat currency blanket over the underlying. Do you have enough food? Do you have enough grain? Do you have the metals, the materials to defend yourself?
Let's take an example. Why is there a war in Ukraine? Why is there a war anywhere? Only because in America, which is the country which produces most weapons, makes huge profits of producing those weapons, they have to have wars. They have to have wars. It's not that anyone in America wants a war, anyone in Britain wants a war. The people that control this country and America are the military-industrial complex. And the military-industrial complex is the people that control society. Okay. So therefore, if they are in an economic crisis, because they are all the time, they have to have an economy which is based on destruction. Because only by destruction can they reproduce the things that have been destroyed and make a profit, and reproduce them again and again and again ad nauseum.
Okay, so
let me just finish. You just finish. So therefore, the war in Ukraine was started by America. They took over Ukraine. They had a coup, and the CIA took over Kiev. They installed a bunch of fascist neo-Nazis who they knew were going to attack Russia, because these neo-Nazis actually hate Russians as a race. These neo-Nazis were very useful to America, because America's idea was also to take over Russia, because it's economically a great idea to take over Russia from their point of view. So they started this whole process of putting NATO in Ukraine in order to provoke the Russians into war, which they did, and then get this whole thing going. But they didn't want to do it themselves. There's a few British as well in Ukraine, but they wanted the Ukrainians to fight the Russians, and they could, as always, sit back and make the money from the profit.
Okay, so look.
So therefore, the Ukrainians have been conned into fighting this war, as other people are conned into fighting war.
Okay, so
the people that control them, they actually control them.
So let's go a bit higher. In international relations, there's three main schools. There's the realist schools, realist, liberal, and constructivist, about how states act. The realist school, which is that states just care about security and it's about domination. The liberals, they believe in, the idea of the UN, everyone working together. And the constructivists, you can have many different ideas there. From a materialistic point of view, if there is no God, if everything can be explained from a materialistic point of view, the realist school of thought makes most sense. Why? States are run by people. People have leaders. Leaders evolved, and their evolution is what leads to these cognitive biases, or what Dominic Johnson calls strategic instincts, which leads to these types of wars. So what I'm going back to is the same point I made previously. Being a materialist and a communist, there's a fundamental contradiction between what the communists claim human beings are like and what human beings are really like if the Darwinian materialistic naturalistic story is true.
When you say,
do you understand the fundamental issue?
Yeah, well, for me, I would express it slightly differently, perhaps slightly more simply. We'll see if this is the same thing. Essentially, if we look at the observed facts we have of history, of the development of societies, we look at the successes and the failures and so on. Particularly, we haven't discussed the Islamic Empire and how it's fundamentally different from the kind of European colonialism. And I think those comparisons are important for me, because for me, there's essentially two classes of hypotheses. One is Islam is telling the truth, and this is about how humans work and society works, and this is why we see what we see. And the other is a various basket of European ideas and so on, and material ideas and so on, and perhaps they're the answer. Now, if I look at the two hypotheses and I match them up to what we see happening, I see that Islam fits very well what we observe. And I also see that it appears to contain a viable solution within that working model. Whereas on the other side, I don't see it fitting the reality so well. There's a lot of fudging going on. And I also don't see a viable working solution being proposed within those models.
So that's the wrong starting point.
Is that? Do you agree? Is that a summary of?
That's
Yeah.
it. That's what I'm saying.
When your last comments, the first beginning of your comments was erroneous. You say states are controlled by people. They're not. States are controlled by classes. A state in this country and in America and most countries, states are controlled by a capitalist class.
If those classes had no people in, they wouldn't be controlling anything.
But people,
So
people aren't into you're looking at people as individuals. As Thatcher said, there's no such thing as society, just individuals. That's not true. There is no such thing as individuals. States are class entities.
no, but this is important because
It is important because you're interpreting people. People don't exist really.
No, and
they are classes. And when you use the word materialist, you're using it incorrectly.
No, this is really important because you exist, you are a person. I am a person, you are a person. And I know what you're saying, but I need to make this point because if you start on a basis and say individuals do not exist, that is a contradiction. It's flatly a contradiction with reality. So there needs to instead be some way to say, yes, individuals do exist, so you make contact with reality, and then say, but as a collective, then you get some emergent different dynamics as a group that can't necessarily be analysed on the basis of the individuals. And that's legitimate. Do you see what I mean? It's really important to...
Exactly what you're saying.
It's
a good point.
I should say, really, society exists because it exists as a group of individuals who are split into classes. And their thoughts and processes are depending on their class. A working class person thinks entirely different from a capitalist class. So therefore a state becomes a state when people, for one way or another, either a dictatorship or a so-called democracy, becomes a state controlled by people. But the people in that state who control that state are not people in the sense that they are ruling on behalf of a class. And the capitalist class rule through either democracy or dictatorship. There's no difference. There's no difference between democracy and dictatorship because in the end, we all live under dictatorship, capitalist dictatorship. Whether you call it
You get 2 or 3 colours in democracy. You only get 1 colour in a dictatorship.
No, you don't. You don't.
But you know,
It's a difference of colours. That's what I'm saying. It's not.
But David, fundamentally, to wrap up,
The red and blue
we've
sides.
had a good conversation. It's very nice talking to you.
We're not going to agree.
You know the perspective me and him are coming from. We're basically saying it's theism, which gives you a better economic, political, and cultural worldview, and you believe in materialism. That's the fundamental point of disagreement.
Tell you what, when I come to speakers court, I've been coming since I was 17.
Wow.
I'm now 83. So I've been
You look
coming
good.
here all these years. And I always, when I was coming to 17, there were no religious groups. There was no Islamic people. There was no Muslims. There were very few Christians. There were no Jews. Well,
Mostly it's political.
Yeah.
So it was mostly political. There were anarchists, there were communists, there were socialists, there were all sorts. Now, I always made it in my mind, when I came recently, within the last few years, after being away for quite a while, I came the last night, I was absolutely dumbfounded by all these different religious groups. And the politicals were over there.
And it's just Heiko.
Yeah,
It's just Heiko.
and I said to myself, after a similar situation, not this conversation, but lots of other conversations, I was never going to get into an argument with a theist.
Well, so here's the interesting...
Actually, we spoke about politics, economics, and theism, which is...
I was going to bring up
this is the interesting thing.
Libya under Gaddafi. Gaddafi and Libya is an Islamic country.
Yeah.
It was. But Gaddafi was one of the best socialists and communists ever because he ruled Libya on a purely socialistic platform.
Well, I think they called it Islamic socialism, which I don't agree with.
I don't agree with it either,
Yeah.
because it was deficient in many ways. Because the deficiency was the fact he was a Muslim. But the fact is that you had a society which was far more democratic than most countries. They used to have money from oil, which they gave to people. Like they give money to people to buy houses, free education, free health services. Everything was. It was the highest standard of living in Africa, next to Iraq, which also was a very, very high standard of living.
Yeah.
Both Iraq and Libya were very good societies, even though I didn't agree entirely with them, because I don't agree with the situation in Russia. But basically, what happened? Both Libya and Iraq decided they were going to deal oil in local currencies and not the dollar. That was the reason, and the only reason, why America decided to destroy Iraq and destroy Libya.
Yeah, but also Gaddafi was looking to build a gold-backed Pan-African currency. I mean, that's a big
His
factor as well.
inspiration, he wouldn't say it was socialism.
No.
He called it socialism. I can't remember, Jamaica or something or other. So every 6 months, the whole country would close down for everyone to go to a public hall or town hall and to discuss what they were going to do.
But he wasn't a materialist.
Yes.
No, he wasn't.
But this is what's really interesting.
Great speaking to you.
Great speaking to you too. This is just one final thing I want to say. Is that this is one of the things that's really interesting for us. As you said, you didn't want to get into too religious a conversation because with many people, with many other belief systems, there is a whole separate thing. Like there's politics and real life, and then there's religious life. But for us, it's one integrated whole, and that's why we haven't been trying to shoehorn it in. For us, it's a fundamentally integrated worldview.
Yes, I understand entirely where you come from, and I say, and I've said many times, I would never ever persecute any religion, even though I totally disagree with it. And the mistake that Stalin made was that he persecuted religions.
But doesn't every communist say that?
No, but it's true. But
We've heard this before.
No, but the point is that Stalin took over in 1924 when Lenin was dying.
Yeah.
And Lenin was dying because Stalin was taking over. And from that moment, the whole situation in Russia changed. The whole situation changed. Up until 1924, from 17 to 24, even with all the problems, Russia was a progressive country, the most progressive in the world. And in the 30s, when America and Britain was in the slump and thousands and millions were unemployed, in Russia, everyone was working hard to build up society, and they did so.
I understand what you're saying, but people like
Stalin,
but people like Barrera, who were around the time of the death of Stalin and others, that standing committee type of mindset, it was all the same. Whether Stalin was in charge or someone else was in charge, they were going to do the same thing.
Because Stalin believed in socialism in one country, that was his ideology. Communists, real communists and Bolsheviks believed that socialism can only happen.
We're going to go around the whole thing again if we keep
That's
going.
great speaking.
One other thing I wanted to say was, so I used to be atheist. I was raised atheist predominantly. I graduated in theoretical physics, and that's actually, I went in atheist, came out Muslim. So if you ever want to break your rule about not discussing religion, feel free to say hello. No, I mean specifically looking at materialism and why do I believe God exists, this kind of stuff. We can have a very interesting conversation. If you like the science-based stuff and logic and things, we can do that. Just let me know.
I'm very religious when I